Dear students, as you are aware that UN makes various kinds of projections related to various aspects of population. In this module, we are going to look at the projections especially related to the urbanization in the world countries and cities. As you can see that globally more people live in urban areas than in rural areas, with 54% of the world's population residing in urban areas in 2014. However, in 1950, only 30% of the world's population was urban, and by 2050, nearly 66% of the world's population is going to be projected as urban population. There is a significant diversity in the urbanization levels that reached by different regions. The most urbanized regions include Northern America, which is 82% population living in urban areas in 2014, and Latin America and the Caribbean with 80% of the population, and Europe with 73% of the population living in urban areas. In contrast, in Africa and Asia, the population mostly remains rural, with 40% and 48% of their respective populations living in urban areas. All regions are expected to urbanize further over the coming decades. Africa and Asia are urbanizing faster than the other regions and are projected to become 56% and 64% urban respectively by 2050. Close to half of the world's urban population reside in relatively small settlements of less than 5 lakh inhabitants, while only 1 in 8 live in the 28 megacities with more than 10 million inhabitants. Several decades ago, most of the world's largest urban agglomerations were found in more developed regions, but today's large cities are concentrated in the global south. The fastest growing urban agglomerations are medium-sized cities and cities with less than 1 million inhabitants located in Asia and Africa. As the world continues to urbanize, sustainable development challenges will be increasingly concentrated in cities, particularly in the lower middle income countries, where the pace of urbanization is fastest. Integrated policies to improve the lives of both urban and rural dwellers are therefore much needed in this period. While the high-income countries have been highly urbanized for several decades, upper middle-income countries have experienced the fastest pace of urbanization only since 1950. In the lower middle-income countries, the pace of urbanization has been slower. Nevertheless, this group of countries is expected to experience faster urbanization than others in the coming decades. In 2014, the proportion of the population living in urban areas was 39% in lower middle income countries and 30% in low income countries, whereas by 2050, as projected by UN, these countries are expected to reach on average 57% and 48% urban respectively. The coming decades will bring further profound changes to the size and spatial distribution of the global population, such that the world's population in 2050 is projected to be 66% urban. The global urban population is projected to grow by 2.5 billion urban dwellers between 2014 and 2050, with nearly 90% of the increase concentrated in Asia and in Africa. Trends in urbanization are integrally linked to sustainable development. With good planning and governance, the increasing concentration of people in urban settlements can facilitate economic and social development while also offering opportunities to mitigate the adverse impact of consumption and production to the environment. However, rapid and unplanned urban growth threatens sustainable development when the necessary infrastructure is not developed or when policies are not implemented to protect the environment and ensure that the benefits of the city life are equitably shared. Accurate, consistent and timely data on global trends in urbanization and city growth is a key input to better access current and future needs with respect to urban growth, and to set policy priorities to promote inclusive and equitable urban and rural development. In order to systematically track levels and trends in urbanization around the world, the Population Division of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations has issued since 1988 biennial estimates and projections of the urban and rural populations of all the countries in the world and of the populations of major urban agglomerations. The process of urbanization or urban transition describes a shift in a population from one that is dispersed across small rural settlements in which agriculture is the dominant economic activity towards one where population is concentrated in larger, dense urban settlements characterized by industrial and service activities, as stated by Montgomery et al. In 2004. Historically, the urban transition has been linked closely to economic development. In Europe and Northern America, rapid urbanization over the late 19th and 20th centuries have observed to accompany the industrial evolution and rapid economic growth. A similar, although general weaker, association between urbanization, industrialization and economic development has been observed more recently in many parts of Latin America and the Caribbean and Eastern Asia as well. The urban transition and economic growth have been linked in part because economic development fuels urbanization. People are drawn to cities that offer varied opportunities for education and employment, particularly in the industry and service sectors. Urbanization, in turn, generally has a positive impact on economic development and poverty reduction. Cities concentrate diverse pools of labor that businesses need in order to grow. Furthermore, the density of people and businesses in cities facilitates knowledge and information sharing, fostering new enterprises and technological innovations. As hubs of commerce, government and transportation, cities provide crucial links with rural areas, between cities and across international borders. Approximately 80% of global gross domestic product, which is called as GDP, is generated in cities, as mentioned by Grubler and Fisk in 2013. Recent trends in developing regions, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, have challenged long-held notions about the associations between urbanization and economic growth. While a dearth of data on urbanization in the region complicates any inference about trends, the available evidence suggests that the urbanization process continued in sub-Saharan Africa between the 1970s and 2000, despite economic contraction in the region over that period. Demographers note that the urban transition observed in sub-Saharan Africa in recent decades, while not consistent with economic theories of urbanization, is consistent with the demographic transition experienced in the region. The demographic theory of the urban transition explains that in the pre-transition period, characterized by high birth and death rates, the population is mostly rural and mortality rates in urban areas tend to be much higher than those in rural areas, owing to the heightened risk of death from infectious diseases that spread easily in densely populated areas with poor sanitation. During this period, urban birth rates tend to be lower than urban death rates, such that the urban population is sustained only by continuous replenishment through rural to urban migration. With improvements to public health, death rates being to decline faster in urban areas than in rural ones, and eventually the number of urban deaths fall below the number of urban births, such that the urban population grows not only because of rural to urban migration, but due to natural increase as well. In most regions, including in sub-Saharan Africa, the process of urbanization has tended to occur in tandem with the declining mortality and fertility rates that characterize the demographic transition, lending support to the notion that the urban transition is better explained as a demographic phenomena than strictly as an economic one, as mentioned by Dyson 2011. Whether driven by rising economic prosperity or by other demographic shifts also underway, trends in urbanization present great opportunities for development, but at the same time give rise to formidable changes to social equity, environmental sustainability, and governance. Indeed, where people live is a powerful determinant of how they live with respect to employment, consumption patterns, access to basic services such as housing, water sanitation, education, and healthcare, as well as their environmental footprint and vulnerability to natural hazards. With sufficient planning, competence, and institutional capacity, governments are able to take advantage of the economic of scale that cities provide to supply infrastructure like roads, piped water, and electricity, as well as basic services like education and healthcare to a large population at much lower costs than would be required to reach the same number of people dispersed over rural areas. These advantages of city life, combined with the higher incomes available in urban areas compared to rural areas, afford numerous advantages to city dwellers. Urban living is often associated with higher levels of literacy and education, women's status and labor force participation, as well as better health, greater access to social services, and enhanced opportunities for cultural and political participation, as mentioned by Cohen 2006. Nevertheless, rapid and unplanned urban growth threatens sustainable development when the necessary infrastructure is not developed or when policies are not implemented to ensure that the benefits of city life are equitably shared. An estimated 863 million people, representing nearly one-third of urban residents in developing regions, lived in slums or informal settlements in 2012, characterized by housing that is non-durable or overcrowded or that lacks access to improved water and sanitation or security against eviction, as stated by United Nations in 2014. Addressing urban inequalities is a key to achieving sustainable development. Slum dwellers face greater exposure to environmental hazards such as pollution and suffer increased health risk as a result. Evidence from 191 demographic and health surveys conducted in countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America undertaken over the last several years show that infants and children residing in slums have substantially greater incidences of diarrheal illness than their urban peers and are less likely to survive to their 5th birthdays, as cited by Fink, Gunther, and Hill in 2014. The urban poor in developed countries also face marked disparities in health and well-being. Furthermore, much of the increase in the numbers of urban poor is taken place in locations that are highly vulnerable to natural disasters and are expected to experience the greatest impact of climate change, such as low elevation coastal zones and arid regions known as dry lands. Seasonal, temporary, and permanent migration is already among the strategies that households utilize when faced with food and livelihood insecurities associated with climate vulnerability. And climate-related migration could become more prevalent in the future with the anticipated increase in frequency and intensity of adverse climate events. The future growth of cities and concomitant appropriation of land and natural resources will determine success towards an environmentally sustainable future. In some cities, unplanned or inadequately managed urban expansions lead to rapid sprawl, pollution, and environmental degradation, together with unsustainable production and consumption patterns. Today's cities are growing twice as fast in terms of land area as they are in terms of population, as cited by Angel et al. By 2011. Consequently, projections indicate that future trends in urbanization could produce a near tripling in the global urban land area between 2000 to 2030. as hundreds of thousands of additional square kilometers are developed to urban levels of density. Suburban expansion threatens to destroy habitats in its key diversity hotspots and contributes to carbon emissions associated with tropical deforestation and land use change. Environmental sustainability is additionally challenged by the consumption patterns that prevail in urban settings. Owing in part to their higher incomes, urban dwellers tend to consume more per capita than rural dwellers. Today's cities consume more than two-thirds of the world's energy and account for more than 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions as projected by UN Habitat 2011 and 2008. Low-density urban areas tend to consume more than high-density areas. Evidence from Toronto indicates that energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions are twice as high on per capita basis in low-density suburban development compared to development in the high-density urban core. To respond to the challenges and leverages the opportunities presented by continuing urbanization, governments should implement forward-looking policies that prepare for a growing number of urban dwellers with an eye towards sustainability. Sustainable urbanization requires generating better income and employment opportunities in both urban and rural areas, expanding the necessary infrastructure for water and sanitation, energy, transportation, information and communications, ensuring equal access to services like education and healthcare, developing sufficient equality and quality of housing, and reducing the number of people living in slums, and preserving the natural assets within the city and surrounding areas. Now we will look at the levels and trends of urbanization. As you can see in the following figure, globally, more people live in urban areas than in rural areas. In 2007, for the first time in history, the global urban population exceeded the global rural population, and the world's population has remained predominantly urban thereafter. The process of global urbanization has proceeded rapidly over the past 6 decades. In 1950, more than two-thirds, which is nearly 70% of people worldwide, lived in rural settlements and less than one-third in urban settlements. In 2014, 54% of the world's population was urban. Global urbanization is expected to continue so that by 2050, the world will be one-third rural and two-thirds urban, roughly the reverse of the global rural-urban population distribution of the mid-20th century. The number of countries that are considered to be highly urbanized by increased dramatically in recent decades and is projected to continue to increase in the coming decades. Among 233 countries or areas, just 24% had levels of urbanization greater than half in 1950, and only 8% were more than one-third or 75% urban. By 2014, 63% of countries were more than half urban and one-third was more than 75% urban. By 2050, more than 80% of the countries in the world are projected to be at least half urban, and just 50% urban will be at least 75%, as mentioned in the figure. Despite the rapid pace of the urban transition observed since 1950 in many countries, a substantial number of countries continue to have very low levels of urbanization. In 2014, only 24 countries had less than a quarter of their respective populations residing in urban areas, down from 106 in 1950. Of these, 9 were located in Africa, 7 in Oceania, 4 in Latin America and the Caribbean, 3 in Asia and 1 in Europe. By 2050, just 7 countries are projected to be less than 25% urban, all but one of which are small island states or territories with well under 2 million inhabitants. Among those countries or areas with at least 90,000 inhabitants in 2014, the most highly urbanized were Hong Kong, Macau and Singapore, having each 100% urban, followed by Qatar with 99% urban and Kuwait and Belgium each 98% urban. Projections to 2050 indicate that each of the 90 urbanized countries will be more than 97% urban. The 10 least urbanized countries in 2014 were all less than 20% urban, as you can see in the table. By 2050, 7 of the 10 least urbanized are expected to be at least 25% urban. Levels of urbanization vary greatly across regions. In 2014, high levels of urbanization at or above 80% characterized Latin America and the Caribbean and Northern America. Europe, with 73% of its population living in urban areas, is expected to be over 80% urban by 2050. Africa and Asia, in contrast, remain mostly rural, with 40% and 48% of their respective populations living in urban areas in 2014. Over the coming decades, the level of urbanization is expected to increase in all regions, with Africa and Asia urbanizing faster than the rest. In 2014, the proportion of urban in Asia and Africa was increasing at rates of 1.5% and 1.1% per annum respectively. Nevertheless, these two regions, which are projected to reach 56% and 64% urban by mid-century respectively, are still expected to be less urbanized than other regions of the world. Regions that are already having relatively high levels of urbanization are urbanizing at a slower pace, at less than 0.4% annually. Temporal patterns in urbanization since 1950 have varied across regions. In Asia, the rate of urbanization has fluctuated widely since 1950, mainly as a result of a stagnation of the urbanization process in China in the late 1960s and early 1970s and its subsequent upturn. Europe, Northern America and Oceania, on the other hand, each experienced a period of stable urbanization, and overall the rates of urbanization have been slower over the past 2 decades. In Latin America and Caribbean, the rate of urbanization has declined smoothly over the past 6 decades. The pace of urbanization has accelerated recently in Africa, and while the rate of urbanization is projected to decline gradually in the coming decades, Africa is expected to be the fastest urbanizing region from 2020 to 2050. Overall, in this module, we learned that how urbanization refers to shifting of population from rural areas to urban areas, and how urbanization is an important factor in assessing the quality of life of population in terms of their access to education, health, employment, and social equity. Thank you.